Good evening, and welcome to our 16-week webinar series entitled Sharia Crimes, Comprehensive Training for Peace Officers, Social Workers, and Judicial Officials. This is week 2, and we've pre-recorded the training portion of our webinar to try to reduce any technical difficulties that some of you may have noticed that we did experience last week. So the training portion of this is pre-recorded. However, the Q&A will be live, and we invite you to take advantage of the Q&A session. Look for the button on the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. Click on it, and as you listen to the material that is presented tonight, add one or more questions as we go along. We will address the questions live at the end of the presentation. This webinar, as all the webinars, it is recorded, and you can find the podcast typically within 24 hours at the United West Sharia Crime Stoppers website page. Again, we're going to focus on specific topics each week that are meaningful and affect your communities. Typically, these communities that we live in have very well-intentioned members of the American justice system. However, they're just not trained to do their job, unfortunately. And so tonight we're going to address the current threat. It is 9/11. There was a current threat in 2001, and we did not know it. The current threat exists today, and that's what we're going to cover tonight on 9/11. We are brought to you by Sharia Crime Stoppers, the organization that's an affiliate of the United West. My name is Dick Manaseri. I'm a co-founder of the organization along with Mary Werbicki and David Borres. Mary is also the social director for the United West, and of course, David is our course developer and presenter. David, if you remember from last week, I'll go over it briefly, has the background and the status to present this information in depth. He's done his own research and citations for all the material that he's presented. This is based on 45 years of public service in the law enforcement area, in the military, and in the civilian domain. In the civilian domain, David was a senior deputy sheriff as well as a police chief. He's been training police officers with this material since 2012, and over 1,500 officers in the southeast part of the United States have benefited from his training. David's going to talk about the current threat. Again, our goal is simply to make the American justice system great yet again, and we're looking to do that one professional at a time. And now David is going to address the current threat.
Well, thank you, Dick, and good evening, everybody, on this anniversary, the 17th anniversary for 9/11. So let me go off screen, and we will start tonight's PowerPoint. Let's orient ourselves for tonight's webinar. Last week, we addressed one aspect of how the Muslim Brotherhood is attempting to subvert our Constitution by influencing the training federal law enforcement, Department of Homeland Security, and our intelligence agencies and all components of the Department of Defense receive about the Islamic threat. In short, it has all been purged. And we called the purge an example of soft jihad. Tonight we'll turn to the overt, violent form of jihad, the other axis of the grand jihad, and explore the nature of this threat. And again, both axes complement each other. While we focus almost exclusively on the violent threat of jihad, the Muslim Brotherhood operates virtually unhindered. We will continue our discussion about this axis of the threat in 2 future webinars. Our sole purpose is to understand our enemy by answering all of Sun Tzu's questions. And the only way we can do that is to let jihadists define themselves by listening to what they say to each other, by reading what they write, by studying their history, and when possible, by interrogating them. During tonight's webinar, we'll cover the following topics: the beliefs of Muslim fundamentalists, the 3 types of jihadi threats to America, the concept of leaderless resistance as the principal means of attack jihadists have used in America since 2005, the defining characteristics of jihadists, how jihadists have targeted peace officers, and other examples of the various jihadist threat to our nation, to include our southern border, and the ultimate objectives of Islamic jihad. Throughout our webinar series, we intend to accomplish these 3 objectives. to distinguish between the protected religious pillars of Islam and those that are not protected, to distinguish between peaceful Muslims from the fundamentalist Muslims who want to subvert our Constitution, and lastly, to offer some response measures to counter their activities. Although all religions have those who hold deeply held beliefs and are therefore considered very devout, nevertheless, there are several characteristics that are unique to Muslim fundamentalists. We'll look to Dr. Michael Yosef for the answer. He is the author of Blindsided, The Radical Islamic Conquest. He was born in the Middle East and has a PhD from Emory University on social anthropology, focusing on Islam. Our jihadist enemy holds very strong traditional, orthodox, or original Islamic beliefs. And he follows the Quran as originally written. And he sees his actions as defending Islam through the use of violence as prescribed in over 109 verses of the Quran to obtain Islamic dominance. And it doesn't matter who stands in his way. Even Muslims who do not share these convictions will be dealt with as apostates and killed. The label our enemy uses against apostates is considered the most pejorative term to define a Muslim as a traitor, a backslider, or a minnow, Muslim in name only. This is why so many Muslims remain silent and don't speak out against the jihadists. This is called the doctrine of takfirism, to stigmatize any Muslim not part of Team Jihad, and to censor any Muslim opposition or opposing viewpoints. This doctrine is followed by the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all other jihadist groups. The flip side of takfirism is bayat, or loyalty pledge, to a jihadist leader or group. We'll look at this term more closely during the webinar on radicalization and why it signifies a jihadist attack is imminent. The word we can use other than fundamentalist is Salafist, or a Muslim who is devoted to restoring Islam to its original roots as practiced by Muhammad and his immediate companions, the first generation of jihadists. Remember from last week, there are three types of jihadists facing us: the 9/11 style jihadists, or others who are affiliated with so-called international groups, to include sleeper cells or agents prepositioned in the United States by one of these groups, who are waiting for the order to attack from their parent organization. Then there are the jihadists that are regional in nature, followed by those jihadists radicalized here in our neighborhoods, who act on their own, choosing the time, place, and method of attack. But wait, as we'll see, some aren't so alone after all. All of the jihadist attackers since 9/11 have been from this third group. As former FBI agent Ali Soufan says, the message of inspiration for these jihadists lives on, even though we keep killing the messengers. Following 9/11, jihadists changed their attack strategy from large-scale, expensive operations to smaller, single jihadist attacks, or death by 1,000 cuts, attacks independently executed for spiritual preparation to demonstrate the return of Islam to its historical roots. Our enemy believes jihad is an expression of spiritual piety, designed as a cleansing process to purify oneself through the shedding of blood, all for the pleasure of Allah, who jihadists are willing to die for through martyrdom. This is why it's important to read what our enemy tells us. Authored by Abu Musab al-Suri, The Call to Global Islamic Resistance, provides us with the jihadist blueprint for post-9/11 attacks. Al-Suri published the new strategy in 2005, and it was immediately adopted by one of his notorious students, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And the rationale is clear. Carrying out a small operation every month against the enemy will have more impact on him than a big operation every year. The statement was authored by Abu Bakr Nishi, who wrote The Management of Savagery in 2004. Naji was a senior al-Qaeda official, some believe was the group's chief theoretician, who we'll look more closely at later. Note after every jihadist attack in America, our media goes to great lengths to minimize its significance by asserting that it was just a lone terrorist attack with no connection to a larger group like ISIS or al-Qaeda. By this rationale, we can write off all the attacks since 9/11 because none have been of the large-scale variety and all have been committed by lone independent jihadists. Well, let's look at a couple. One such attack occurred in Manchester, England in May 2017. That was the first suicide vest attack committed in a Western country. The results were horrific and extremely deadly. 21 people were killed. 17 were females, many in their early teens, many others who were seriously disfigured or injured. ISIS claimed responsibility, while many asked why. Why was this particular venue chosen? Why target young children? Perhaps the star of the event has something to do with it. She clearly exemplifies the sexual power women have over men, and she has a wide following of Western followers who represent the next generation of female power, all willing to flaunt their sexuality publicly. All wrapped up in innocence, the Dangerous Woman Tour was an ideal target for jihadist misogyny or sexual-based violence against Western women who don't comply with Sharia dress codes of modesty and are therefore considered the spoils of war to be punished. By flaunting their femininity, women are signaling their independence and power over men. Thus, our jihadist enemy feels fully justified to fight against those who don't follow their God. Fighting is prescribed for you, says chapter 2, verse 216, against anyone who rejects Islam through the use of terror. One of the last words of Allah given to Muhammad before his death in 632, fight those who believe not in Allah, nor acknowledge the religion of truth. Our jihadist enemy justifies his actions by following the commands to violence in the Quran. One face of our enemy, the so-called lone jihadist behind the attack, is Salman Abdi, another second or third generation Muslim in the West who was radicalized to kill. But later, facts get in the way of the initial assertion that he acted alone. In fact, there was a Texas connection to it. Saeed Azam Mohammed Rahim conducted an online chat with the Manchester attacker when Abdi asked for permission to proceed with his operation to kill. This is an example of why lone wolves don't act alone and are part of the global network. A network that has repeatedly targeted the symbols of our decadent culture, populated by Western women who refuse to follow Allah's rules. Another symbol of our decadent Western culture was attacked a year prior to Manchester. Omar Mateen, like so many jihadists before and since, just blends in, looks so normal. But in this case, he kills 49 innocent civilians while pledging his allegiance to ISIS during the attack. The question we keep asking since 9/11, why do you attack us? And our enemy keeps answering, because we do not follow Islam and obey Sharia. This is key and is an example of why we must listen to our enemy. To be sure, however, he does not tell us what the politically correct crowd wants to hear or what the media wants to report. 5 days after the attack, al-Qaeda celebrated Mateen as a martyr in its Inspire publication and offered its assessment or critique of what Mateen did. Note the religious significance given to the attack. Al-Qaeda called it a blessed operation. It also called for more attacks against unarmed civilians who they now consider legitimate targets. Al-Qaeda anticipated others would follow Mateen's example and highlighted the importance of his target selection of a closed area, that Mateen knew what he was doing and had the will to use his weapons to kill others. Since Al-Qaeda's call for more jihadists to follow Mateen in July of 2016, dozens have answered the request. And more have answered since October of 2017, all motivated to perform jihad for Allah, all fitting our jihadist profile of second, third generation Muslims or recent converts to Islam, all radicalized within our neighborhoods to kill for their noble cause. And let's not forget Sirhaj Ibn Wahaj and his jihadist accomplices at the New Mexico compound, who were training young children to become school killers and who planned other attacks, one against Grady Hospital in Atlanta. Speaking of converts to Islam in America who have become jihadists, just some of the 79 who have done so since 9/11. And Nicholas Young, the first and to date only peace officer charged for and convicted as a jihadist. Young was a member of the DC Metro Transit Police. The reason I show these pictures of older jihadists is because following the Las Vegas attack, Stephen Pollock was considered an unlikely jihadist convert because he was too old and didn't fit the profile of jihadists in their mid to late 20s. The facts tell us there have been many older converts to Islam who became jihadists. And there is a full court press to target peace officers. In June 2018, Mohammed Mahad, 47, attempted to hire an assassin to murder a Houston police officer following Ramadan, according to Chief Artisudebedo. Since September 2014, there have been 20 additional jihadist attacks specifically targeting peace officers, several who have been killed and others seriously wounded. Just one of the 109 verses in the Quran directing death to all non-Muslims. So when you meet infidels, strike the necks until you have made a great slaughter among them. Note that all the attacks against peace officers in the United States have been by lone jihadists. Note also, this is an officer safety issue that the majority of law enforcement is clueless about. So it is not a coincidence that these have happened. It all started back in 2014 through the inspiration for these attacks coming from ISIS, followed two days later or shortly thereafter by a message saying use whatever means available to target peace officers. Smash their head with a rock, slaughter them with a knife, or run over them with your car. One of the questions I anticipate getting, especially from peace officers viewing this webinar, is the last jihadist successful attack in America was almost 1 year ago on Halloween in New York City. So maybe the jihadist threat in the United States isn't as big as you're implying. Well, let's see. On December 22nd, 2017, Abdullah Everett Ibn Gordon, a recent convert to Islam and a former Marine, targeted Pier 39 in San Francisco for maximum casualties, and he had no escape plan because he was ready to die for the cause. More recently, on July 4th of 2018, Abdur Rahim Rafiq pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda and plotted to kill military members and their families on Independence Day. Then there are the plots that didn't make the news. Note also the number of jihadists identified in March of this year alone. This threat still exists, but does not get the coverage and attention it deserves. On March 7th, Muslim juvenile brought an explosive device to his high school. Also reported on March 7, Abdul Muhammad, age 32, attempted to sexually attack a college student. Reported 1 day later, Jonathan Reese was reported to authorities by his mother, who found a copy of the Quran, prayer beads, and Muslim robe and references to ISIS. Reported on March 9th, Abdurrahman Sheikh Mahmoud, age 26, wanted to train in Syria and returned to the United States to attack. Reported on the same day, Wesley Dallas Ayers, a convert to Islam, age 27, planted multiple explosives and hoax devices at various locations in South Carolina. Reported on March 13th, Ahmad Al-Oq, age 22, was intercepted with a bump stock rifle and at a hotel room overlooking a women's march. Reported on March 14th, Corey Johnson, age 17, killed a 13-year-old boy and stabbed 2 others. On the same day, Ahmad Muhammad Ahmed, age 30, attacked a woman in a motel room. Reported March 20th, Kari Malik Whitehead, a convert to Islam, turned in by his parents who feared he was becoming radicalized. Reported March 21st, Lysandra Johnson charged with arson for attacking the Broward County Sheriff's Office substation. One day later, Jahid Eid had a shootout with police, wounding 1 officer and 5 others. And reported March 23rd, Hafiz Kazi, age 51, attacked Travis Air Force Base. 2 days later, on March 25th, the special agent in charge of the Sacramento field office of the FBI, Sean Reagan, hadn't figured out the motive. But what do we know about the attack? The attacker made numerous phone calls to Iraq and Syria, a note he left reading, "I did this for Allah and Islam, Allahu Akbar," and repeated instructions by ISIS to target the military and law enforcement. Just some examples of recent convictions. Reported March 22nd, Eric Jamel Hendricks was also part of the jihadist attack at Garland, Texas. Reported March 27, Elijah Sadu may have been an honor killing perpetrator. And reported on March 30th, Mohammed El-Shinway convicted for providing material support to ISIS in terrorism financing. On May 25th, Adam Neward Hyatt, 36, pled guilty for possessing firearms. All of this works out to an average of 2 terrorist suspects arrested per week. One of the problems we face is the media no longer covers these attempts as previously. So many have the impression we've turned the corner and don't have as much to worry about. Well, be patient. There's more concerning information to follow. May appears to have been a slow month. Reported on May 5th, 2018, Bretta Brown attacked passengers with a knife just like ISIS has ordered its followers to do. Azizi Yarin arrested for solicitation for capital murder and for making terrorist threats. And then there's the so-called green-collar crimes used to fund jihadists overseas. And finally reported on September 6th, the numbers of jihadi threats continue to rise. We've had virtually 24/7 media coverage about Russian collusion with Trump in the last election, but no coverage about jihadists trying to kill us. Turning now to our southern borders threats and the infiltration of sleeper cells with the assistance of drug cartels in Mexico. Operating out of Juarez. Note, as we cover this material, how long government officials have known about this jihadist threat and how little our elected officials and our media have told us about it. Their silence is deafening. Since 2010, other than Mexicans have been trying to gain entry into America, many from Muslim countries. In 2014, a warning was issued for an attack against Fort Bliss, Texas, and for other pending attacks. Arrests for ISIS followers also were made, and they have continued ever since, with the first ISIS camp discovered in 2015 at a Tex-Mex border near El Paso, Texas. The drug traffickers have used tunnels under the border for years and have formed a partnership with jihadists to infiltrate into America through well-constructed tunnels capable of accommodating hundreds of jihadists. One scenario is an attack on San Diego itself. Although warnings have been issued, rarely does the media report them. And rarely does any elected official relate this problem to the need for greater improved border security. It's only because of Judicial Watch that we know about Mahmoud Omar Kabir from Kuwait, who has trained ISIS followers in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Yemen, who lives now on the border near El Paso, where he is again training ISIS fighters. Let's look at the numbers reported by the Department of Defense's Southern Command. 331,000 illegal immigrants crossed into the United States in 2015, 30,000 from terrorist countries, reported by Colonel Lisa Garcia, the Public Information Officer of the Southern Command. While the State Department has warned about the presence of Hezbollah and ISIS throughout Latin America, and as the Muslim population continues to grow, producing an even greater chance that many will be radicalized for jihad. And we wonder where our illegal drugs come from. Hezbollah and jihadists use the drug trade to finance their operations by raising tens of millions of dollars, while these same drugs kill thousands of Americans in drug jihad, all according to the commander of the Southern Command. And the geographical area whose border attacks are feared, reported on January 4th of last year, and again on January 5th of 2017. While the Vice President of Venezuela, Tariq el-Assami, is a key operative in the global narcotics trade with ties to Iran, and has issued identification documents to Hezbollah agents facilitating their entry into the United States. Another Hezbollah threat warning issued on March 14th of this year in Pensacola during a state legislature hearings, followed by another warning issued on April 23rd about sleeper cells poised to launch large-scale attacks in the United States. And on May 1st, the director of the Department of Homeland Security provided more threat information. Imagine a small jihadi sleeper cell becomes activated to attack in any American city or in several cities simultaneously, all wanting to die as martyrs. Using small maneuverable pickup trucks, first responders would be overwhelmed. Reported May 20th of 2018, former Admiral Ace Lyons discussed how our enemies have used our addiction to drugs to destabilize our nation for conquest. And he addressed how efforts to target Hezbollah were stopped by the Obama administration. So yes, border security is in fact national security. Let's turn away from the southern border for a moment to our colleges and university campuses to a report issued by the Institute for Gulf Affairs that warned about the number of Saudi and Kuwaiti students, many with dual citizenship, that have left the United States to join ISIS, while federal agents were asleep at the switch and unable to prevent their return. What we have is a perfect storm for attack. Jihadists being smuggled across our southern border with the help of drug cartels to raise money, supported by Argentina and Iranian-backed Hezbollah agents, many being targeted and integrated in refugee flows, supported by the visa lottery and chain migration system, by a Congress unwilling to do anything about it. But there's more to the perfect storm. millions of Muslims of America camps located throughout the United States, consisting of United States citizens, all following a Pakistani religious leader that has been given 501c3 tax-exempt status. The FBI has reported on the group that the camps have the capability to initiate attacks in the United States through jihad, all with ties to Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. The organization is headquartered in New York and consists of Muslims from our prison system and military undergoing small unit guerrilla training. The camps are located in rural areas throughout America, in locations where local law enforcement is incapable of keeping tabs on them. They also have camps in Mexico and Venezuela. All of the Muslim of America camps would make ideal hiding places and staging areas for the sleeper cells that have already infiltrated our country by crossing our southern border. As I said, the camps are located in rural, isolated areas where surveillance would be difficult, and the camps offer all sorts of training opportunities for jihadists to make ready by honing their skills, all waiting for the right time to attack. In May of 2017, a longtime member of the Muslim of America, 64-year-old Ramadan Abdullah, was arrested with a large cache of weapons. But the Muslim of America, or Jamaat al-Fughr camps, aren't the only ones in the United States to worry about. By now, we have all seen the news report about the latest jihadist training compound in New Mexico and how young children were being prepped for jihad attacks in our schools. As John Guandolo, founder and president of Understanding the Threat, recently wrote, this camp was run by Sirhaj Wahaj Jr., son of a fully radicalized, unindicted co-conspirator of the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. So it would be no surprise that Wahaj Sr. would raise a jihadi son, also radicalized. Guandolo goes on to address the question of whether the Muslim Brotherhood has such training camps in America, and indicated Muslim Brotherhood officials in 1981 have said that there are. So what are the common characteristics of all these terrorists? How would you define them without the restrictions of political correctness and multiculturalism? Well, they're all second and third generation Muslims or converts to Islam. That's the common denominator. They all understand jihadist goals to establish Sharia law over mankind. Some belong to a small jihadist cell like a husband and wife team or two brothers, all radicalized in our neighborhoods with outside assistance, all willing to die. In fact, they look forward to death as a martyr. We can also call them true believers because they are convinced Allah is on their side. ISIS has posted instructions on how to survive in the West. The key is to blend in, to look normal as the San Bernardino jihadi couple, with many battle-tested jihadists returning home and told to make ready to attack. I don't recall this bit of information ever received the media attention it deserved when uncovered in March 2017. But jihadists have access to all sorts of weapons, not only in Europe, but here in the United States. Look at the numbers and type of weapons that were uncovered in Spain. These are the types of weapons that we have to be concerned about reaching our shores. In early May of 2017, police in Minneapolis discovered hand grenades, handguns, assault rifles, and large amounts of ammunition following the arrest of Abdullah al-Faraq and his brother, and recalled the weapons seized from the Muslims of America member we just discussed earlier. On August 5th of this year, it was reported that a pro-ISIS media outlet is calling for biological attacks in Western countries and highlighted San Francisco in the process. This was followed by a United Nations report stating that ISIS is not defeated and has 30,000 fighters prepared for offensive action around the world. Even more ominous is information revealed to Congress earlier this year concerning Hezbollah's sleeper cell backed by Iran already positioned for attack in America, just waiting for the order to do so. Reported on August 29th of this year by the Washington Free Beacon, 2 Iranian agents arrested for conducting intelligence gathering activities for the Islamic Republic of Iran by targeting Israeli and Jewish facilities in America. Activities believed to be financed by Obama's Iranian nuclear deal. All jihadist groups and individuals have the same goals: establish a worldwide Islamic state under Muslim rule, defeat all obstacles to include Muslim apostates, establish pure Islam as originally practiced by Muhammad 1400 years ago, and follow the literal word of the Quran, and impose Sharia law over mankind so that peace and social justice will regain forever. By way of reminder, we're getting to know our enemy by listening to what he says. By review, we've seen what Abu Musab al-Suri wrote back in 2005 concerning the new, smaller, cheaper attack strategy used by jihadists since 9/11. Unfortunately, few listened, and we continue to accept these attacks as the new normal. My personal fear is this attitude adjustment has permeated throughout law enforcement. Because the threat we face has not been defined or named, we call him an uncontained active shooter or bomber or whatever, while we are being careful not to offend the political correct crowd or Muslims themselves. At the risk of offending, let's look a little bit deeper. Remember our sources for this webinar and all others. The Quran believed by Muslims to be the direct words of their God, Allah, given to Muhammad between 610 and 632. The recorded words and deeds of Muhammad believed by Muslims to be God's final prophet to mankind. And the classic manual of Islamic sacred law that is agreed to by both Sunni and Shia Muslim scholars and the Muslim Brotherhood. Let's first understand our terms. Islam is the name given to this religion, and it means submission by its followers who are called Muslims. Islam represents a complete, total way of life and prescribes rules and behavior for virtually all aspects of a Muslim's life. As stated previously, every word in the Quran is believed to be the exact words of Allah, the word for God in Arabic. And Muhammad was chosen as the receiver of God's words. Note that because Muhammad was illiterate and could not write, he could only verbally transmit what he was told by God to others, who wrote the words down to be later assembled into the Quran 20 years later. The rest of the theology of Islam comes from the recorded words spoken by Muhammad and his actions witnessed by others, all of which was greatly influenced by the prevailing tribal practices of the Arabs of this time. Let's briefly look at the 5 pillars of Islam that are mostly religious in nature and therefore protected by the First Amendment. Islam demands submission or total surrender to Allah, and Islamic law or Sharia means straight path or pathway to the water source. Pillar number 1, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. This is known as the Shahada or statement of faith. Say it 3 times and you're now in, a Muslim for life with no probationary period and no option to leave. An expression of oneness or Allahu Akbar, God is greater, and he is the only one, and Islam is the only true religion. Pillar 2 concerns prayer that is to be done 5 times a day. It's an expression of love and admiration and gratitude. From a legal standpoint, our first problem with Islam comes from the 3rd pillar. which obligates Muslims to give 2.5% of their total wealth to 8 categories. The seventh being fighting for Allah, meaning people engaged in Islamic military operations according to our Green Book. This is a violation of federal law whenever material support is given to a designated terrorist group. The fourth pillar is associated with Ramadan, a celebration, but not only for piety, but also it commemorates when Muhammad was first victorious in battle following his arrival from Mecca to Medina in 622. The final pillar is the pilgrimage all Muslims are expected to take to Mecca once in their lifetime and walk around the Kaaba or black cube to be believed to contain a meteorite from heaven. Muslims walk around the cube 7 times and kiss the stone in order to absorb their sins. But Mecca is not an open city. It is the original safe space reserved just for Muslims. Non-believers are not welcome. With this brief condensed overview of the protected religious aspects of Islam, let's now turn and take a closer look at the literal words of Allah in the Quran. Jihad as follow. Islam is designated to be perfect by Allah. It is the only true religion to prevail over all other beliefs. Thus, the traditional battle cry signifying Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater. A Muslim or follower of Islam has no option but to follow what Allah and Muhammad command. It is not for a believer when Allah and his messenger have decreed a matter that they should have any option in their decision, and whoever disobeys has strayed into a plain error. This is why jihadists follow the words as written. If they don't, they disgrace this world, and when they die, face a grievous torment. Then do you believe in part of the book and reject the rest? What is the recompense? Who do so accept disgrace in this world, and in the day of judgment they shall be consigned to the most grievous of torment. Jihadists look forward to death because of their obedience to die for Allah and gain paradise. So, is a strict follower of Islam a radical? Normative Islam is based on the commands of Allah in the Quran and the examples and teachings of Muhammad. Former police officer Stephen Kirby says if you follow Allah's commands literally, you're devout and not a radical out of step with Sharia. Dr. Kirby has spent over 30 years in law enforcement and is now devoting his time to investigate Islam. I'm honored that he is registered for this webinar. A few more terms to help understand our enemy. Remember, Islam was born in the tribal culture of Arabia. Muhammad came from the largest tribe in Mecca, and he decreed that Muslims are distinct from all others and constitute one big tribe called Ummah for Islamic community. Under governance of the Islamic State, led by Allah's designated representative on earth, this is how oneness or Tawhid plays out. Thus, the one finger salute by your enemy. To review, Islam is supreme and must dominate. It is perfect for all time, and conformity leads to the ideal way of life because Islam frees mankind from having to make choices and thus leads to freedom. So where did jihadists turn for their inspiration? One of their principal ideologues is Sayyid Qutb from Egypt. He is a prolific writer, and his most famous book, his milestone, is considered the Jihadist Manifesto. So we'll turn to that now and see what Qutb has to tell jihadists. To understand what the militant Muslims think, read Sayyid Qutb. He's considered the heart of intellectual rationale for Islamic jihad and violence. Jihadists read Qutb, and the first three generations of Muhammad's immediate companions, known as Salafis or righteous ancestors, and because later generations drifted away from true Islam, Qutb called for a revival to the ways of the Prophet. For the fundamentalists or devout jihadists, Islam must be resurrected in order to survive. Qutb's concept: for Qutb, only Allah is sovereign, and mankind must be totally subservient to his rule, who has made himself known through his revelations that abrogate all other religions and erased all distinctions between peoples. Only Allah can make laws, and there is no separation of mosque and state, making Sharia supreme. Only after being liberated from man-made laws will mankind be truly free and at peace. Qutb continues, there are some obstacles to Islam. Before any of this can happen, the obstacles have to be removed. Rebellion against Allah must be suppressed. Rebellion that surrounds Islam, known as fitna or tumult, opposition, temptation, or mischief. And how can this happen? How can it be resisted? Only through jihad. Only jihad can liberate mankind and establish God's religion under Sharia. So the battle is on to cleanse mankind once and for all. It is in the very DNA of Islam to free mankind from servitude. Jihad, a witnessing to the faith and to struggle for its implementation. So jihad becomes a form of piety, religious expression to witness for the faith through struggle. In order that God's sovereignty is established, to arrange human affairs according to what he says, to abolish all satanic forces and systems that oppose it, to end the lordship of one man over another. So fitna, the removal of obstacles is a holy struggle for noble cause jihadists to follow. Many Arab logos for organizations and on their flags have two swords like the Muslim Brotherhood. One sword represents the suppression of fitna or obstacles from amongst Muslims and Islamic countries. The other to destroy all non-Muslim obstacles external to Islam. According to Qutb, this is an organized struggle following Islamic law and practices to liberate non-Muslims from man-made forms of governance by restoring Islam to its original state in order to establish Allah's sovereignty. Jihadists are just as much a threat to non-Muslims as they are to Muslims who don't believe as jihadists do, or who desire to leave Islam. In our next webinar, we will cover Sharia law and women, how both Muslims and non-Muslim women should be treated. We will look at the theological basis for male-female relations as promoted by the fundamentalists, the privileges granted to Muslim males versus women, the significance of dress codes for Muslim women, the reasons why jihadists target Western women, marriage practices promoted by the jihadists, and the impact of these practices on Muslim males. This concludes our webinar for this evening about the current jihadist threat to America. I'll now turn to Mary, who will address your questions and comments.
Thank you, David. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Excellent information that we need to get out to as many communities as possible. Just want to say a couple of things before we start the Q&A. We are grateful to everyone for your patience as we here at Sharia Crime Stoppers work through some of the technical aspects of presenting this training. We feel very strongly this training is critical to protecting communities and are doing all we can to make this training go as smoothly as possible. Also, today marks a couple of notable times worth mentioning. Today is a very sad day in America's history. 17 years ago, the attack on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, with a loss of nearly 3,000 lives plus over 6,000 injured. And 6 years ago today, the attack on the US facilities in Benghazi, Libya. Both on 9/11 and both an ideology or system that calls itself a religion. This ideology continues attacks today across the West, while so many still promote it as just a religion and one of the Abrahamic faiths. Incredible that training to understand the impacts and threats of this ideology is still restricted or non-existent. We are glad to see the registration for this training continuing to grow and will continue to develop training and webinars once this 16 weeks is completed. We will always remember 9/11 and what it did to America. We want to also mention Happy New Year to our Jewish friends. Today ends the celebration of Rosh Hashanah. Thank you for also joining us tonight. So let's get started with the Q&A. David, since approximately 80% of mosques and Islamic centers recruit and train for jihad, and we have jihad training camps in the USA, and imposition of foreign Sharia law is their goal, how can we shut them down without going down the false court argument of religious freedom?
Okay, sorry. Anyway, mosques are going to have to be investigated individually. Yes, 80% of them are funded by Saudi Arabia or have been. 80% or more have some affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood. And studies have shown that over 80% also are promoting violence to its membership. But we can't just treat them all with a broad brush. Law enforcement knows that. They're going to have to be monitored, surveilled, and investigations are going to have to be conducted to close one down. During the course of the webinar, I will give some examples of where this has been done, specifically in Maine, and by using an undercover individual who went into a mosque and compiled enough information that could probably close the mosque down if the local officials wanted to do it.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that there are an average 2 suspected terrorist arrests every week in the US. Is that occurring in any particular part of the US? Is it occurring in places where the police departments are better trained in realizing a terrorist attack could happen?
No, I think it's the information that I showed you that's pretty well all over the country where we're finding where these arrests are being made. In rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas. The FBI is doing a much better job of, through its broad network of informants, to monitor this type of activity. So I don't see any pattern in terms of location.
Okay. The Fulcra camps that you mentioned, why haven't local law enforcement closed them or eliminated their training camps?
Well, I'll tell you what one local police chief told me when I talked to him about 2 years ago. We have 2 camps in Georgia, and I went to visit him. He was the chief of police of Commerce, Georgia, right outside or very close to one of our camps. And he told me right now they're not breaking the law. So until they do, they cannot be closed down. You think of these camps as they're under U.S. jurisdiction in terms of due process. We must follow all the rules and regulations that pertain to any U.S. citizen. So unless there is a law that is being broken, they can't be shut down.
Okay, who are the key players in the federal government and in various state governments who we need to target with public outrage for their failure to acknowledge the threat?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Your elected officials, your senators, your members of the House of Representatives, for the most part, have not done their part, have refused to bring up legislation to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. In particular, the leadership of our House of Representatives and the United States Senate does not want to touch this issue. But fortunately, we have a new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who has gone on record repeatedly when he was a member of Congress that he wanted to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and has supported those measures that were currently under review. Well, now he has the authority at the stroke of a pen to designate the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization and all of its affiliates. I suspect that the only reason he hasn't done so is he's tied up with other pressing international matters. But he is a friend of ours, and he needs to be pressured to move forward on this important issue.
Great, thank you. What is the difference between fundamentalist Islam and fundamentalist Christianity? Does the Bible promote violence, or is Christian violence an aberration of the religion?
I get asked that question all along, especially when I go out to civic groups. Yes, there's been violence in the, especially in the Old Testament, but I defy anyone to show me where the Christian God has ever told his followers to kill non-believers. I will show you 109 verses in the Quran where Allah, the Muslim God, has done just that. So that to me is the primary difference in a nutshell. Now, if you want to get into the religious differences between gods, that's a topic for another session. But just think about that for a moment. The violence in the Quran is endemic.
Thank you. If Muslims have to contribute to jihad activities, isn't this considered subversive activities and intent to overthrow the U.S. government or any other government?
I do know it's a violation of providing material support to a terrorist organization. First of all, the organization that the money goes to has to be on the State Department's terrorist watch list. And secondly, you've got to trace the money from a particular person to that group. The Holy Land Foundation trial was an example of when this was accomplished. It was the largest transfer of money from the United States for ostensibly good purposes to Hamas, to support Hamas. We will be talking more about this particular trial in future webinars, but suffice it to say, 5 people were convicted in this trial for the transfer of over $12 million to Hamas. 307 individuals and entities were identified as unindicted co-conspirators. And under the Obama administration, they refused to prosecute any of those 307 unindicted co-conspirators. So we're playing catch up. The statute of limitations, I'm afraid, has run out. So we're starting all over again. And it's a question whether the Department of Justice wants to pursue it.
Okay, I think this is going to be our last question. Is there any chance of the Treasury Department being able to be an ally for the patriotic Americans in this fight against the funding of the mosques and training camps from a foreign source, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, etc.?
Absolutely. There's all sorts of ways the federal government could put this network out of action or seriously contain it. It's a question of whether or not they want to do it. And that's where we stand at this point.
Okay, I think we'll close it down at this point, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dick to close us out. And thank you, everybody, for all the great questions.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, David and Mary, and all the people that have joined us tonight. This is a growing grassroots activity. Again, we're reaching out to each peace officer, social worker, prosecutor, other judicial officials, one professional at a time. We think we can make American justice system great again. And you're part of the team. Let me just say, United West has a motto of one team, one fight. You're on the team by your participation in the 16-week series. You are part of the team. It is one fight. I think David's made that crystal clear, and we're just scratching the surface. So we will be together again on Tuesday nights right on through December 18th. As part of the team, what can you do? Well, you can certainly look for the complete podcast of this session tonight. Both David's presentation and the Q&A will be a single recording. It'll arrive at its location probably tomorrow, and you can look for that at the United West, the Sharia Crime Stoppers page. Look for the podcast and share that with your friends. Share that with somebody in your family. Again, it's a grassroots activity, one professional at a time, and part of the team. As part of the team, you can help us promote that. I do want to highlight next week is a very pivotal presentation. As overwhelming as tonight's presentation was, which is basically talking about mass murder and physical violence. The topic next week is essential for everyone in America. It's women in Sharia. There were conversations about the perfect storm. You may have heard references to the perfect man. Muhammad was not a friend of women. Women and children are treated in ways that we consider criminal, and that will be discussed in great length next week. So we would love to have you come back, bring a friend, get them to register, and let's keep this process going. We are committed, and we appreciate your attention and commitment as well. Thank you very much. Good night.